Today we're looking at the parable of the persistent widow or the unjust judge, or there's been a number of titles, basically underscoring the sense that women had no agency, no authority, were always very vulnerable, and that people who were in power wielded power without any sense of consequences or sense of appropriate response based on whatever is going on. That those who in power are always interested in their own self-interest, and those who are asking for justice are always those who are at a disadvantage. It's a common assumption. I mean, it's really a trope in much of biblical interpretation. And we look at widows culturally as the most abused, dismissed, vulnerable population. The real history of it was actually something a little different. So let's look today at the story of the persistent widow and what might have been going on in the first century. First of all, you've got one of these situations where we've got the juxt of the parable blanketed by commentary above and below to give the full passage we're looking at. So we have Jesus' teachings in the middle, and then the author of Luke adding their own opinion and 2 cents about how to interpret all of this. And often when any of the gospel writers do that, quite frankly, it's not a help. They get in the way of something else that might be going on, that might have been talked about in the era when Jesus was around. So much of it needs to be unpacked and looked at and maybe seen through a different lens. The quick and dirty, easy, don't work too hard at it sermon in this passage is, look, if you pray consistently, then God is going to grant you what you want, and persistence pays off. Now, that's what a lot of people are going to be hearing this morning. The thing is, that is really horrible theology. This assumption that we have to keep after God again and again and again until we finally get what we want. Or the interpretation is, see how God's even more generous than a human judge, that God will give us things without this level of persistence. Or, and this is a more unique traditional interpretation that might not be seen very many places, that God is actually the widow, not the judge, but the widow who is persistent with us in pushing and pushing and pushing until we relent and do what's asked. Now, all three of those are extremely problematic, and quite frankly, they're kind of lazy, but they're where most people will go because over the years, we have inherited certain traditions of interpretation, and this is how traditionally we interpret this story of the unjust judge or the persistent widow. But what does it actually say going on? What's going on there? First thing we have to do is unpack some of the language around this and look at what was done in Greek. Because in the English translations, the widow is looking for justice. But in the Greek translation, the word she's using is vengeance. She wants the system to avenge whoever it is that she figures needs to be avenged. And we're given no background information, no context. The only story we have here is the limited interaction between two not very nice people. It's hard to work with. It's probably why most people who've looked at parables over the years don't even try this with children. How are you possibly going to explain two nasty people where there's no real virtue in either of them? It's probably why Luke, the writer of Luke, felt the need to explain away the situation, even though the explanation really doesn't make sense. Then we've got the judge. We don't know anything about the judge except that isn't believing in God and really couldn't quite care less about what's going on. So he's not interested in social gain, which was the point for a lot of justices. We also have to kind of get away from our Western mindset of guilty until proven innocent, that justice is sightless, that there's some kind of middle ground between the two. That's not the justice system they're working with here. The justice system is a lot more complex and a lot more corrupt, and oftentimes the people who got justice were the ones who were able to bribe the best. And where that influence lasted, I don't know. I don't know anybody yet, as a modern scholar, can look back and truly see how justice was exercised once a decision was made. There might be scholars out there, I haven't come across them. So we'll leave that as an open thing. But the whole concept with the judge was that he was just going to give in to this person because they were just a pain in the neck, and he didn't want to have anything more to do with them. That's not really justice. She wanted vengeance. No explanation of anything going on, who the party was, whether or not she was even in the right, or maybe she was just this nasty person who wanted to punish someone else. That's not justice either. So we can't look to this as being a story about justice, but we can look at it being part of something that really shines a light on human nature. One of the biases that we have when we look at ancient times is that they were a simpler people, a people who agreed more, who had more common culture, common purpose. And that bias is kind of carried through and put into so much public education that we don't know to challenge the assumptions. When archaeologists first started to excavate some of the old baths and temples of Rome, they'd see all this writing on the wall and think, oh, wonderful, what kind of great prose or poetry, words of wisdom, would the Romans pick to put on the walls of their baths to inspire people as they soaked and cleansed? The reality was, once they translated it, there were statements like, Marcus was here, Julia can't cook, so and so charged way too much for anything, so don't use them for business. Whoever stole my towel, I will curse you to the end of time. That's what was on the walls in the bathhouses of ancient Rome. Not terribly enlightened stuff. It was basically glorified graffiti. The point being that we've got to kind of look at the people of ancient times being just like us. And maybe with that kind of lens, we can go back into this gospel and see what's what. Because usually times when you look at a parable, you can see this part is God, or this part is God, or this part represents us in various different places. But when you look at a really difficult parable, like the persistent widow, the unjust judge, it's really hard to find the takeaway. It's not about praying consistently. We'll just take that off the board right now. But maybe we don't have to have a happy ending with a neat little bow tied around this. Maybe what we have to do is look at the real humans that Jesus was talking about. That there was not something that was justified in either of them. And we don't know enough about the backstory to really have an opinion about whether or not any of it needed to be brought up. Chances are that we lost some of the message that Jesus was trying to give us. But maybe what we can reclaim is, are we these people? Are we the ones who, if people persist enough, we cave because we just don't want the hassle? All of us have that as a guilty moment. Are we the people who just pick and pick and pick and want our way so bad that we are not satisfied till we get it? Whether or not that's even what we want anymore is immaterial. We just want our way. We've all had those experiences and encountered people who are like that. So the people that Jesus is talking about are us. Where is our persistence going to go? Is it actually vengeance? Is there something that we're looking for that would not be God granted? Are we the kind of people who are just going to cave to enough pressure? Because that's not a good thing either. Are we the people who are just going to make peace for the sake of making peace? There's something empty and open in this parable. Putting a bow on it, tying it up, giving it a statement of this is what Jesus was trying to say, might be the desire, but it's not practical. I'm afraid we have to walk away from this one with huge questions. Not questions like what was the issue at hand. Those are nice distractions, and we can certainly get caught up in those and have wonderful conversations over a couple of drinks at the pub on night. But what really could be the better takeaway is this me? Is this how I approach my faith, how I approach my friends, how I approach my place in time? Am I so focused on my wants that I'm not seeing something bigger here? Am I so focused on not having a hassle that I'll just let whatever goes on without looking at the natural consequences? It might be a really good week to just kind of stop and do some self-evaluation and not look at a bigger question that can inspire us for the rest of the week. But the small question of who do I want to be? Is there anything in this passage that is an example of how life should be led? All of us can ask that question. All of us should ask that question regularly.